Alright, so in this video we're gonna create an animation for our platform because when the apple hits it, we want to, turn that into something more dynamic. We want to create an animation. It's basically going to be the platform popping when the apple hits it. And okay, to create this animation, we're gonna use the built-in animation system in Unity where you can actually animate properties. So if you click on the platform here, all of these properties you have here, position, rotation, scale, the fields from the sprite renderer, you can animate that through the animation system. And we're gonna use that, and they're basically gonna animate the scale. So let's say that the scale is gonna do something like that when the apple hits it. So just a little bit of popping. And to actually create this, we're gonna use the mechanism state machine based animation system that Unity has since version 5.0, I guess. And I'm gonna quickly remove this because this is from when I was playing with mechanism to see if everything was gonna go well. Okay, so to start off, we're gonna bring the animation tab, and this is where you actually can create the animations you want. So go to Window, Animation. And to avoid this floating tab here, because whenever I click somewhere else, this tab is going to disappear, I'm going to put it right to the side of the game tab. So Window, Animation. Now I'm going to click on the animation here, and I'm going to drag it right by the side of this game window. There we go. Now we can see the animation and the scene view. I'm going to pull it to the left a little bit. Alright. So I'm going to select the item that I want to animate. And it says here, it's kind of hard to read. Let's see if I can see it better. I'm gonna hit Shift Space to maximize this view. And it doesn't work with the animation view, it seems. Oh god. I'm gonna expand this just so we can read what's actually written here. Okay, so it says, to begin animating leaves bush, which is our object, create an animator and an animation clip. So basically we need to create an animator, which is basically what drives the animations for the game object, and this uses mechanism, and the animation clip is properly to actually animate something. So if I hit create, this automatically is going to attach an animator to my leaves bush, and it's going to create a new animation clip for us. So before I do that, I'm just going to quickly go into the assets folder, right click, create, and I'm going to create an animation folder, animations. Actually, I think I'm gonna just do one, but animations should be good. So now go to animations, window animation, select the leaves bush. This is what I'm talking about. When you have this floating tab and when you click somewhere else in the hierarchy or in Unity, it just disappears, right? So just click on the leaves bush and then go to the animation tab, hit create, and it's gonna basically ask you to save this animation clip. I'm going to go inside the animations folder, and I'm going to save this as popping. So the popping animation basically is going to animate the scale. There's two ways you can do this. You can just drive the properties through the inspector here, but I'm going to specifically say that I want to animate the scale and just the scale. Be very careful with this, because if you animate the position and you play this animation, the position is actually going to be driven by the animation and not by the scripting. So you're going to be careful with. So we have to be careful with that and make sure that we just animate the rotation and the scale. Why am I saying rotation? Because rotation is not controlled by scripting, so we can animate that with no problems. But make sure you do not animate the position. So I'm going to click add property here, and you can see that I can select any component from the inspector of my leaves bush to animate, and the scale is under the transform component. So I'm going to expand the transform, and I'm going to click on this plus right to the right of this scale property. There you go. Now I basically have two keyframes, and what a keyframe is basically where a value is defined, and in between two keyframes the value is interpolated. So let's say that the scale and this keyframe was 0, 0, 0, so no scale, and this one was, let's say, 1 1 1. So when I do this, basically when I play the animation, it's going to go from 0 0 0 to 1 1 1. So this is called interpolation. And as I said, in the keyframe position, the value is actually set. We set a value in the keyframe, and in between keyframes, we interpolate those values. So as I said, we want to create a popping effect. And as you can see, there are already 2 keyframes, one in the 0 seconds and one at 1 second. So this basically is going to have a second of duration. And roughly at half of this duration, I want to animate the scale. So I already have the scale 2 grabbed here, and I'm going to just scale it down. And you can see that the scale turns red, which basically means that we are recording the scale. We're saving it as a keyframe. And if you click on this animation again, and if you scroll through this timeline, you can see it plays, right? And just before we end this animation, I want to pop it up just a little bit more than the actual scale. So it goes back to this, and I want to pop it up even further, so it gives this popping effect. So right here, let's say, I want to pop it up. So I'm going to go over 0.2, which is the original scale for the y-axis. And there's already a keyframe saved here, and if I interpolate, you can see that it gives this popping effect, pretty much like if it was launching the apple up again. Alright, so let's just do one more animation, one animation for the idle effect. So basically when there's no particular state being played, we're gonna do the idle state. So to create another animation, I'm gonna stop recording. I'm gonna click on this popping here, and I'm gonna say create new clip. So it's gonna be an independent clip, and this clip is gonna be called idle. And for the idle effect, I want also to deal with the scale. So add property scale, and I'm just gonna scale it up right here. So scale it up. So the idle thing is just this, right? As if it was breathing, even though there's no such thing. Actually, there is such thing, but we can see it like humans do. I don't know. Do you know what I'm talking about? Let's just move on. I'm crazy. So now we have 2 animations. And if you close this, and if you go into the animations folder, you can see that there is a controller that was created. And if you click on the leaves bush, there's actually an animator with this particular controller attached. And what this controller is, this is basically what's going to drive the animation. If you double click on this, it's going to open up a new tab, and I'm going to just drag this into my right to the side of my game tab instead of being at the side of the scenes tab. And here there's actually a state machine. And what a state machine is? A state machine is something that has, a lot of states, and there are transitions in between those states, and these transitions, they have requirements. So let's say a certain condition has to be met for me to go from one state to the other. In this case, a transition is represented by this arrow that connects 2 of these rectangles, and each of these rectangles is actually an animation slot and is a state. So this entry state and this any state, they're always here. The entry state basically means whenever I start playing this, whenever this mechanism state machine is active, I'm gonna go to the state that's being represented here. So from the entry state, I'm going to go to the popping state. Actually, I don't want this. I want to go from the entry state to the idle state, because this is the idle. This is what's going to play when nothing is happening. So what I need to do to make a transition from the entry state to the idle state is just right click on top of the entry state, make transition, and I'm going to transition to the idle state. There you go. I also want to delete this transition, so right click on it. And it seems like a bug, I don't know, but sometimes we can't delete this one. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna delete the popping state. So just click on it, hit delete. Actually, right click, delete. And then it's gone. So as said, the state machines, they have conditions to go from one state to the other, but in the entry state, there's no condition. It always goes to the state that it points to with no conditions. This is a special case because this is the entry state. We need to tell the mechanism system to go somewhere. In this case, we're telling it to go to this idle state. And in case you press play, you can see this animation play, right? Because this is the idle state. It's kind of too fast, so I'm gonna go to the animator tab and I'm gonna change the speed to maybe, I don't know, a third of that. So if I hit play again, this looks way nicer, okay? Alright, so of course, when the apple hits our platform, we want to play that popping animation. So we need to create a transition to this particular state, but we just deleted it, so we're going to create it again. Right click, create state, empty. And this empty state, this is going to be our popping state. So just click on new state here, and we're going to rename it to popping. You can see that the name of the animations are matching the name of our states, even though this is not required. This is just, of course, for I don't know, naming purposes, because it makes sense to call this idle and to call this popping, but I can call it whatever I want. In case I just change, you know, let's say a letter here, I can do this, even though that's okay, that's weird, sorry. Let's go back to popping. So here we need to assign a motion, and motion is just an animation, what's going to be played when this state is active. So we want to play the popping animation, so just drag it here, pretty simple. And we want to create a transition that goes from the idle state to the popping state. So right click on idle, make transition, and just drag it to popping. But when we're done popping, we actually want to go back to the idle state. So we want to create a transition that goes from the popping to the idle state. So right click on popping, make transition, and go back to idle state. As you can see, the arrow points the direction, okay? And when you click on this arrow, you can actually see the conditions that need to be met in order for me to go to the idle, from the idle to the popping state. In this case, there's one special condition that I have to meet, and there are parameters for that. I need to, from script, I need to say that there's a property that has to be true, or there's actually a trigger that has to be, you know, triggered for me to go from the idle to the popping, because I can't do that without a condition, because there's actually there is a condition, and the apple needs to be hitting the platform. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into this parameters tab, and I'm going to create a new parameter, clicking on this little plus here, and I'm going to create a trigger. And the trigger is basically something that gets true and then goes back to false. It's basically something that's triggered. It goes to an active state, and then it goes right back to an active state without anyone having to say it to do that, you know. This is the difference between a trigger and a bool. A bool goes to a true state, and it doesn't go back to a false state unless someone told that bool to do that. So we're gonna call this trigger is colliding with apple. So a pretty detailed name. And I'm gonna click on the transition that goes from the idle state to the popping state. And here on conditions, I'm gonna click on this plus. And basically I want to say that is colliding with apple needs to have been triggered in order for me to do this transition. So I just need to select the trigger, and that's pretty much it. Let's say that you have a floating point value that has to be greater than 10, let's say, for you to create a transition. You just click here, add a floating point value, and let's say, I don't know, random value. So if you want to add this to your transition condition, just click on the transition, click on this plus to add a new condition, select your variable, so random value, and then you can do greater or less. In this case, let's say that I want to do greater. So for this transition to occur, is colliding with apple needs to be triggered, and random value needs to be greater than 10. Okay. We don't know actually how do we set these values, but we're gonna deal with this within a second. Okay, so once I'm playing the popping animation, there's something that's missing here. I need to go back to the idle state. I need to play popping once and then go back to the idle state. But there's no condition for that. I just need to be done playing the popping animation to go back to the idle state. And you don't have to do anything with the transition conditions to do that. You just need to make sure that has exit time is enabled. What this means that this state needs to be completely played before we actually transition. And if you think carefully, this is not true for the idle state. I don't want to have an exit time for the transition from the idle to the popping state. What this means, having an exit time, it means that I'm going to have to play a full idle animation before I move to the popping state, and we might have missed the actual time for the animation. We're just going to leave with this has exit time on, so you can see what does this imply. But that's pretty much it. We have the animation set here. We have the animation also set here. Okay, so now how do I trigger this through scripting? Basically, we need to know where the collision happens and where this have to be triggered. This basically have to be triggered when the apple hits the platform, and all the collisions are dealt within the Apple script. So right click on Apple, edit script, and in here, inside the else if platform, that means we're colliding with the platform, I want to grab a component from the platform, and that component is the animator component, which is basically what drives the animation playing. So I'm gonna go to platform, I'm gonna get a component from the platform, which is the animator, and I'm gonna say set trigger, and this is basically gonna set the trigger to true, so it's going to enable that animation to be played. And the trigger name is colliding with Apple. I don't know if the I is capitalized, but it's not, so it's not capitalized. We need to make sure we pass the correct name of the variable, and this should do it. So let's go back to Unity. This, as you can see, it's pretty simple. Just to make sure that you get this, in the leaves bush, this is our platform, there is this animator component, and this is what we're getting, and then we're calling that set trigger function, and this is basically linked with this animator, with this controller. So as you can see, there is such trigger here, there is such parameter that I'm trying to write to. So this is totally cool. Okay, so if I hit play, let's see if I can make this work. And as you can see, it first ends playing the idle animation and then it plays that popping thing. But this is not what I want. This is why I need to disable this has exit time option for the transition between idle and popping. So clicking on this transition, disable has exit time, and trust me, this is gonna save you a lot of time, because when I was dealing with some animations, I didn't know about this, and it was actually a headache until I discovered that I had to disable this has exit time option. So if you hit play again, hopefully this is going to work. There we go. It just needs to be faster, right? So going back to the animator component, go on popping, and you can actually increase the speed, maybe to twice as fast. It's still kind of happening, I don't know, earlier, but it looks nice. It looks nice. And now you know how to deal with mechanism.